ready to go ahead and get started today?
Yes.
All right. This is Angela Ganser-Bovis. I am the chair of the promotions committee for the Quad City Behavioral Health Coalition and also sit on the steering committee. On behalf of all of us, we'd like to thank you for joining us today for this Lunch and Learn. Thank you to our presenters as well, Angela and Lydia. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to present to the committee today, as well as members of the community that were interested in this topic. Also, a special shout out to Stephanie Burrows from Robert Young for helping us to arrange CEUs for this event. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Please keep yourself on mute unless you have a specific question that you are asking to the presenters. If you do have a question, though, we would prefer that you place it in the chat box. Also, if you are attending to receive CEUs, please enter your name into the chat box as Stephanie is keeping track of who is physically present for this presentation for CEU purposes. And at the end, she will put a link to a survey. You must register for this class as well as complete that survey in order to receive CEUs. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? If nothing further, Angela, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Angela. And I am Angela Gallagher. I'm the Executive Director for the National Alliance on Mental Illness and its local affiliate, NAMI, Greater Mississippi Valley. And before we introduce Bettina, I'd just like to give you a little bit of background about our organization. NAMI is the nation's largest grassroots organization dedicated to building better lives for the millions of Americans affected by mental illness and their families. In fact, our organization was started over 40 years ago by a small group of families, actually 2 moms up in Wisconsin, who were gathered around the kitchen table and concerned about their 2 sons. And those moms at that point in time were literally told to get over it. And it was their parenting skills. It took more than 7 years for each of those sons to be formally diagnosed with schizophrenia. So NAMI has a little bit of militant roots. We're here for the families, and I'd like to say that with so many social service and healthcare providers on the line today, we do appreciate what you do. And the education and support programs that our organization offers, I'd like to think dovetail nicely with the services and the support that you provide, both individuals living with a mental health condition and their families. NAMI believes that recovery starts at home with a strong family support structure, with members of the family who know their loved one best. And therefore, what we focus on heavily is strengthening that family structure and teaching families how to hit the reset button on family dynamics quite often, and how to give family members both coping and communication skill sets so that they can learn to advocate strongly for their loved one that lives with the condition. So that's my long-winded introduction. Sorry about that. I get a little passionate about that. I think we're going to move to the next slide, and I'm just going to introduce a few statistics for you so that we can take a look at the statistics on the next slide, and we'll see just how many minority populations are affected by mental illness. You may already be aware of this. So while our presentation today is going to talk more about Black and Latin communities, I just want to recognize that Other races, such as Asians, are also impacted, and the LGBTQ plus group is also highly affected and because of trauma, and is affected and have mental health conditions. So on screen here, we're showing you the prevalence of any mental illness in all US adults. And if we'll jump to the next screen. NAMI Greater Mississippi Valley is actually introducing a new program in the Quad Cities. It's called Sharing Hope. And Sharing Hope is designed for the Black community, and NAMI Compartiendo Esperanza is the Latin version of that same program. We find that too often inadequate information, stigma, and uneven access to services prevent members of the Black and Latin communities from getting the mental health support they need. To respond to that situation, our national organization has selected NAMI affiliates across the state of Illinois to start a pilot program to reach out into these communities to increase mental health awareness and help both the Latin and the Black communities find access to supports such as your organizations in terms of healthcare providers and social service agencies. These Sharing Hope programs provide basic information about mental illness, including the signs and symptoms and common mental health concerns, and provide a platform for how to talk about mental health. And of course, we're always out there wanting to decrease the stigma and, as I said, improve access to supports. We take a look at the next slide. Let's look at what the pandemic, I'm sure you're very much aware and you experience this on in your own organizations. You can see the numbers there about how our community is stressed. And what we're going to talk to you about today is also, we hope you'll learn more about the barriers for accessing care. And we do that at NAMI through research, education, advocacy. And I want to jump to the next slide because NAMI actually worked with the Harris poll last year to see how the pandemic has affected our general population and specifically people of color. So the survey, the information that's on the slide right now, sought to better understand the impact of mood disorders, which include common mental illnesses such as bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, and other kinds of depression. The survey found that symptoms are not well managed. Among those with mood disorders, Asian Americans at 19% and Hispanics at 18% were more likely to report their mental health condition as poor compared to Blacks and whites. The screen we're looking at now also the survey measured difficulty in accessing accessing treatment. So the struggle to get treatment and support was greatest for Hispanic people in particular. 70% reported that there'd been a time in their life when they wanted mental health treatment, but did not receive it. And that number is compared to 58% of Blacks and 55% of Asians. Next screen. I think one more stat, and then we're going to get to the heart of our discussion. Lastly, the survey found that people of color, 77%, also reported experiencing greater difficulty opening up to others about their mood disorder compared to white people. at 69%. And Hispanics rated at 78% of reporting the greatest difficulty. Earlier research, which you may be familiar with already, has identified a number of factors associated with culture-based differences. And that includes language barriers, cultural differences in how people relate to and talk about their subjective experiences. And I highlight the word subjective, and because we're going to see this in some comments that we review as Bettina works through this program. All said, this latest mood disorder survey shows we need to continue to work towards greater openness in discussing mental health. And that's what we're doing here today. So thank you. And we need to find ways to increase access for care. We're going to move. I'd like to introduce Bettina McWilliams, and she's going to tell a little bit about herself before she gets started. However, I do encourage you, the format of the program today really is Bettina's going to be talking. We're going to be sharing some of the Sharing Hope videos for both the Black and the Latin communities. And we really appreciate if you would please participate via the chat box. And we'd like to have some interaction with you today. So with that, Bettina.
Sure. Thank you, Angela. If you received the email and there was a flyer there, it had my little face on it, it talked enough about me. The most important piece of that information is that I am a family member and a volunteer for NAMI because of that. I walked into NAMI looking for some help for students because, as you saw, I am an educator, and I ended up finding help for myself and for my family. Before I get started, I'd like to encourage us to pause here for a moment of silence for those of you with family members who have completed suicide, and for those of you who are in those affected numbers that Angela just mentioned, or if you know someone who is in those affected numbers. I'm going to ask that you remember these families in our moment of silence, as well as the family of Chesley Chris, as we pause. Thank you very much. I'd also like to add, if you know someone who is considering suicide or considering completing suicide, please contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK, and that's 8255. So if you are going through all of this, you're not going to want to remember such a long number. So we ask that you encourage others and yourself to save this number in your phone with capital HELP. So many times we say help is on the way, but I encourage you to know that help is here. If you are a texter and you'd rather just text 741-741, text the word strength, capital STRENGTH, to the crisis text line 741-741. Or when you're feeling better these days, you can go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. One of the biggest myths is not talking about suicide, preventing others from completing suicide. And I know I started on a very strong note because the struggle is real. We need each other, we need to encourage each other, and we need to talk about wellness. Angela mentioned earlier that NAMI Greater Mississippi Valley is proud to be a part of the 9-affiliate pilot organized by NAMI Illinois to introduce NAMI Sharing Hope and NAMI Compartiendo Esperanza in the Quad Cities. Too often, inadequate information, stigma, that word really gets me going, and uneven access to services prevent members of our African American and Latin communities from getting the mental health support that we need. To respond, NAMI, which I don't know if we said out loud, stands for National Alliance on Mental Illness, we are working with our national office, and Illinois was selected to be a part of a 6-state pilot to launch the redesign programs that we just mentioned. These programs are designed to increase mental health awareness and support in African American and Latin communities. Each of these community education programs cover essential topics, including signs and symptoms of common mental health concerns, or how to talk about mental health, decreasing stigma, and mental health services and supports. So as Angela said, she gave you those stats. And as you hear stats, I no longer want you to look at the numbers, 64%. Think about the people that represent those numbers. Think about the people that make up those numbers. And if each one of us reach one, that those stats can go down, then we've done our part. If we can gain the help we need as an individual, then we've done our part. So we're going to take some time now to talk about wellness in the African American family. As NAMI approaches the Black and Latin communities, there have been particularly pointed discussions about how to frame or approach mental health discussions. And the first thing that was found out was that Black leaders and Latin leaders want us to say wellness is the key word, opposed to illness. Because if we feel like we're going to be labeled, or our family is going to be labeled as someone living with mental illness, it also creates one more barrier. So we want to focus on the mental health condition, the mental wellness of ourselves and our communities. Okay. We have 2 videos to share with you today. The first is from the perspective of Black community leaders. We can get ready for the first video, so you can go back one. The first is from the perspective of Black community leaders, and we want to take a look at how these leaders approach mental wellness topics. Afterwards, we're hoping to have that discussion that Angela told you about. If you feel compelled to speak and time allows, we'll have you to do that, but we may need to wrap you up if that's necessary, because we do want interaction, because this topic is to be discussed, not just talked. We don't want to talk at you, we want to talk with you so we can help ourselves and our communities. So at this time, we're going to ask you to go ahead and run the video on healing together. And as we wait for that video to run, I saw one question come through, Angela, and I believe someone answered it. So I'd like you to check the chat to be sure that that question was answered appropriately concerning your statistics that you were sharing.
Statistics, sure. I did provide a link to the national survey results so that the Harris poll and NAMI National Mood Disorder Survey. I've posted that link, and I can do it again here.
Sure. Thank you for that. I'll bring out some things to look for as the video runs. Stoicism that the speakers talk about. It may surprise some, and others may be able to relate. There are challenges to putting words together to describe your feelings, maybe when you're talking to a healthcare provider, and you may notice that you're talking about physical ailments that you could be experiencing as a result of a mental health condition, but you may be diagnosed with, a physical ailment versus the mental health condition that you have and you need help with. So those things are important to those of you in the field that are discussing concerns and situations with individuals. Keep that in mind as well. It's odd that at the time that this presentation had to air, that we are dealing with so many things in the African American community. Not saying that any of the other communities that Angela mentioned that we're going to share with you today is not experiencing some of those challenges, but February 1st, the week that Black History
show, and then we can have in the full screen.
So I'm looking forward to having this conversation today about African Americans and mental health.
A lot in our culture think that you can just pray things away. And I believe in prayer, no doubt, but I also understand that not one miracle in the Bible occurred without the person needing the miracle taking action.
What's difficult sometimes is probably reflecting on being a community member who may feel like you've lost your role and you need help reconnecting.
We are such a strong, resilient people. And sometimes because of that, we have this, or oftentimes I think, there's this stoicism about us, and it's like we're not allowed to be upset, not allowed to have depression or anxiety.
So I'm excited to sit down with my brother, with my sister, and talk about mental health in our Black community. Let's make it happen. And since I'm the least among these two, I'm gonna let I'm gonna let you guys go ahead first. Well, Dr. Logan, why don't you start out with that, if you don't mind?
Okay. So my why, I mean, and when it comes to mental health in the Black African American community, I'm reminded of a healthy cultural mistrust. We historically, Black and brown people have not trusted mental health and medical field, and have had good reason to, have had very good reason to. And we can think about, slavery and how people were treated, how, the idea that we don't feel any pain. So I think just the visual of us, the visual of people who look like those African American community, who represent that community, it releases some of that stigma automatically. And we have just never been given permission to not be stoic and to not just be like it doesn't bother us. Our men haven't, our women haven't, our children have it, and I do think that it is hurting us. It's killing us. So being able to have some permission, and I think with permission comes words. Like there's so many people I've worked with that don't know how to put words to what's happening, and words are so powerful, and we can heal through that. So that's a huge part of my why.
Shaheed, you want to go next, brother Shaheed? You want to go ahead?
I appreciate the invitation, Pastor. As you said earlier, Dr. Logan, there is a mistrust there, because there is equally so a mistreatment, right? That's either driven by racism and the mistreatment, misdiagnosing, and the incarceration of, folks who are copper, Black, people of color, whatever it is that they would coin us as. In any time frame, our mental health is usually leveraged against us to really be the basis of the science and laws that existed to enslave us.
Right.
It was considered a disorder to want to be free, to run, to flee, all those things. It was a disorder to not want to be anything other than what, a white slave master wanted you to be.
Yeah.
And that's the genesis of this industry. And go figure, with that genesis, we don't account for all the hurts, the pains, everything that's inhumane that's gone into this. And mind you, what I'm saying isn't like, that's the way it is for everyone. It's just my reflection.
Such wonderful answers to that question. I guess for me, guys, it's I'm coming from a Christian point of view, because I'm a pastor of a church. But I'm gonna tell you the mistake that our people make. They think that you can just pray mental illness away. You can't. You can't. There's no indication you just pray something away. If we study the Bible, if we study the life of Christ, I'm a believer, I'm a Christ follower, there's always some action that had to take place before the healing and before the miracle. But when Brother Shaheed said that it was viewed as a mental illness to want to be free, right?
Yeah.
So if I flip that, let me ask the question now, like, is it a mental illness? Do you guys think it's part of a mental illness to want to be accepted by them in the worst way? Because I never really have, but because I didn't, I was always unruly. They called me unruly. They called me angry. And so with all of that, and in raising black males in my family, and now my grandkids are going through that, they have this desire to be accepted by this culture, by this people that really don't. If you can't dribble a basketball or catch a football or sing or dance, they're not really worried about your intellectual properties and how intelligent you can be. But bro, Shaheed, when you said that, man, that it was considered a mental illness to want to be free, they still think there's something wrong with that.
Pastor Graves, if I may, I hear you pose the question, is it crazy to want to stay or be a part? And I go one above that, and then I think it's colonial.
Yeah.
When we think racism and its effects, and its dehumanizing effects and so many things, racism is still a tool. You know what I mean? There's a whole shed in which that tool has come from. And I feel it's colonization, and colonization it doesn't look good, feel good, and it's inhumane for any that are the perpetrators of it, or those who wind up experiencing it as victims or whatever the case may be. It distracts us, I feel, or I believe, from acknowledging that, it can't heal the pain that it's caused. It's going to take us returning to a certain way of actually being with each other. Something that, again, that was said by you, Dr. Logan, was this idea of permission. Imagine us being from cultures that heavily relied upon being seen, being brought into life, being given permission. And then when you fundamentally deprive people of that really crucial and critical cultural value, spiritual value, they're lost.
Yeah.
The word that comes to mind is validation. And it's important for us to give ourselves permission to try to find what our words are, to name what's happening, because it happens all the time and we're told it's not real. And it is real. We don't need that validation, I think.
For me, I get a chance to watch people heal together. And that's because we don't brush things under the rug. If a brother or sister are struggling in any area, let's talk about it. Let's deal with it. Let's try to point you in the right direction. I just think that our healing, our mental healing, is not something that can be done alone. All of these things that we're talking about, we've never talked about before. And that's what's celebratory about this conversation, is that now we can be better parents, we can be better grandparents, we can be better aunts and uncles. We can say, wait a minute, they need this conversation right now. Because I remember when I needed it and it wasn't available. And so that, I think that's the beginning part of us really recognizing the village is going to have to take part of it. You have to be in a community of people to really help us get to that place to where we are dealing with our mental illness and are becoming mentally healthy as we're walking this journey and in this journey of life. So. Whether it's a world, another universe.
What?
It really represents life. I can still live and thrive and grow even in the midst of that pain.
Thank you, Angela. And Bettina, I just put in the chat box, what about Stoicism? What about why it's so hard to put words to the feelings?
And we want to hear your takeaways from that. What did you feel? What did you hear? Those of you who are not on mute, if you're not speaking, we ask that you please mute your background. And
I would like some of those when I get my desk. Yes, great. Right now I'm on 2 rolling cards.
Katie Osborne and Christine McNamara, we can hear your conversation. The historical mistrust that was mentioned of the medical system creates barriers. And where does that originate? How many of you remember the experiments done on our people, African American people? The male counselor mentioned that historical mistreatment, misdiagnosis, and incarceration that creates mistrust for systems. These are barriers. That's okay, Katie, it happens. We've had technical difficulties all day. We appreciate you being here. Any comments about the African American people seeking validation from the white culture? If one person wants to unmute and speak, I'll give you about a minute. We are challenged with some timing issues. We're going to play another video that represents leaders from the Latin community.
And Bettina, I would just say for me personally, I watched that video probably about 6 times now, and it never occurred to me that the Black community would be looking for validation. I was making some assumptions that maybe weren't there, right?
If Angela, if you could also add a link to the video directly from YouTube so others can watch later that didn't get all of it, or due to the technical difficulties, the screen wasn't large enough for them. And Angela, to be honest, there are many African Americans that do not seek that validation and do not want that validation. But when you are a child in school and you feel and see that you're treated differently, and you learn to understand that it could be due to the color of your skin, or for you being African American or Black, then you decide, I'm a little tired of this. So maybe if I could be validated by this culture, I'll be treated better. But as we learn more about where we come from and who we are, and we can find our own words to express how we feel, then we no longer seek that validation, but we do seek to be understood. And as we know, in the field of mental health, that can be challenging. I spoke about that while we were waiting for the video. Explaining my hurts and my pains may come across as physical ailments, and it actually represents some of the mental health conditions or mental health challenges.
And we do have a comment in the chat that says, I found it so important that they pointed out how mental health has been misdiagnosed and leveraged against Black.
Exactly. The young man spoke of the pastor that said, I didn't seek validation. I was myself, but then I was labeled as angry, as violent, as a disruptor. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, on the next slide, it just talks about the common barriers to treatment. And we have spoke of them just now, so I'm not gonna go through and name all of them. But Black people may also be more likely to identify and describe physical symptoms when it's actually related to mental health problems. So there are also socioeconomic disparities. The Black community, like other communities of color, are more likely to experience those disparities, such as exclusion from health, educational, social, and economic resources. These disparities may contribute to worse mental health outcomes. And my thing is stigma. Did we want to share what that comment was before I move on, Angela?
The next comment says, some may define owning feelings as a weakness, and that a weakness is of marginalized individuals that they really can't afford to have.
Right.
Can't. Yeah.
Yes. And that is definitely something we were going to bring out, but so very true in marginalized communities, because I have to be strong. no matter how much pain I'm in, no matter my status that I just spoke about, I have to be strong. And I don't want to appear weak when actually getting the help you need shows a greater sign of strength. One study showed that 63% of Black people believe that mental health conditions is that sign of personal weakness. So that's the percentage on that statement you just made. So we're going to run a video that we can hear from the Latin community leaders. Let's be patient as we bring that up. We're going to share that sound and we'll reflect upon that on the other side.
Hi, my name is Alicia Spurlar. If I had to capture my why, I think the easy answer is the kids and the future.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eddie Collazo. The reason I do what I do is because people often talk about second chances. And I think in the community I come from, oftentimes folks didn't have a first chance. And so I do what I do because people deserve a first chance.
My name is Pastor Eunice Sanchez. I love the people, and there's a need. I believe God has called me to this, and just to be a voice and hopefully bring some hope, some change into our community. Brought back a memory. I remember hearing, that's just in your head. You need to get over stuff and just keep it moving. It wasn't taken seriously. Mental health, what is that? You know, are you kidding me? We don't have time for that. Or it's a spiritual thing, just pray it away. And even though I believe in the power of prayer, absolutely. But God made us a community, you know, so we could connect, so we could hear each other, so we could support each other, help each other through things.
I think it really ranges how mental health is defined. We have a variety that goes from I'm not crazy to it's real and it's an actual need. And the exciting part for us is that it's real contingency is growing. And I think that's part of what's come out of this pandemic, right? Acknowledging that this is something real and it's just as real and important as physical health, even though we can't always see it in the same way. It's not always as visible. But I would say that even in my work in the Latino community, you do see a shift in respecting and honoring the fact that mental health is something that we need to be paying attention to.
I think that we're beginning to expand our definition of what mental health is. Growing up, hearing, tengo los nervios malos, my nerves are bad. And it's about the stress of, you know, being a mom, about raising a family, of being the rock. And men didn't talk about it because it was always assumed you're already the rock, right? But I think we're expanding our definition to include things that cause us stress, because when those things aren't addressed, they can result in more serious challenges.
I agree with both of you, but I've also seen coming to a point where there is anger because we didn't ask to be put in this position. I'm a second generation here. So I never really lived on the island. So going back to it, I was called certain names, if you will, even if it's joking. So it puts you in a place where you don't belong here and you don't belong there. So even as a teenager, the grumbling started, you know. There was a time I went into to enlist, and you look at this happens all the time. You look at the list. What do you consider yourself? And they only gave me 2 categories. I literally put in there, I'm a Latina woman. And then I put Hispanic because somebody told me, don't write that because you can get people nervous.
I think it's important to understand colonization has definitely had an impact, I think, on our day-to-day. I was involved in a conversation recently where it was Latinos talking about the term Latinx and whether who of us embraced that term or didn't embrace it, why we didn't, and the challenge that I saw with that term is the same challenge I saw with the term Latino, Hispanic, and the four-letter word that we've as Latinos have heard, and it's that I want to be able to identify myself, because it seems more like you want to know what I am more than you want to know who I am. Mm-hmm. And who I am is more important than what I am. And if you look at me and you endeavor to find out who I am, you allow me.
We can stop right there, Angela Ganser.
Okay, I apologize. I don't know what happened with that.
No apologies necessary. Angela Gallagher has placed the link in the chat, and we're coming up on 12:50. So we'll give you all a moment while I chat about some of the powerful words we just heard there. You want to know what I am. Am I Hispanic, or am I Latin, or am I Latinx? You really want to know who I am. You need to know who I am. Reminds me of the words of Dr. King. Judge me by the content of my character, if you must judge me at all. Looking at the shades, the skin tone of the Latin people that we just saw. They range anywhere from the shade of Angela to my shade and darker. So find out who I am. Get to know me. Don't label me those four-letter words or that N word. Angela posted in there about the decolonization of self. Look at who I am, not my label. And both groups of leaders talked about colonization. And that term goes way back to what was perceived to be the beginning, when people of the white race colonized their America and found the spots of slavery for those that didn't look like them. But that's another subject for another day. But the effects of all of that history dwindles down to today's community. And what you find is, like the pastor said in the first video, we didn't have these conversations in our communities because what happened in that house stayed in that house. You shared any of those things that happened with what you might have called that crazy uncle or that sister that's having a nervous breakdown. We didn't know there were medical terms for what they were going through. And the family was not allowed to share. Someone said, "What are you?" was the question that I was asked as a child so much. And it affects your mental health and mental well-being. There's 1 minute for someone else that would like to share how they felt or some reaction to what you just saw. And I love the way it talked about honoring their cultural roots. I love that. Go ahead.
And so we've had some listeners and viewers today really respond to the idea that the Latin community is stuck between two places, right? You know, not a part of the old world and maybe not accepted fully in this world. And another comment says, "What are you?" Yeah, and that the viewer has actually been asked this as a child.
Yes.
Over and over again.
And so what was the purpose of the question? If you find out I'm Latin, if you find out I'm African American, are you going to treat me a certain way rather than asking me about my interests, things I like to do, things I like, places I like to go, those things that we have so much more in common. When the individual chooses to share that information because they're proud of their culture, then hey, that's on them. You develop relationships with people and you will learn who they are, and it won't matter to you so much as what they are. Okay, Dr. Summerlin, you want to read her comment, Angela?
Well, I see that money was not their barrier, right? That we need to have a safe environment for people to reach out. And in fact, it's been reported that an individual's ability to embrace the predominant or adopted culture is actually a predictor of whether they use healthcare services. Think about it. I mean, we've been talking about it, but that's another way to state it.
Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah. Well, there are higher utilization rates of services if you're in the adopted culture.
And think about you as healthcare providers, as support systems for others. Are people comfortable talking to you? Are there things that we can do together to support one another to be sure that the Latin community and the African American community are comfortable coming in? Or if you notice they're there for one reason and they are not comfortable, what can you do to help them feel welcome? Sometimes people might think that's not my job. My job is to treat the condition and move on. But establishing those relationships, building those relationships will cause you to see beyond the barriers that we talked about here today.
So why don't we look at the next slide, because it really outlines what those barriers are. And
okay. We have some language barriers that we talked about, and immediately when we see language barriers, we think about someone speaking another language. But as you heard from the Black community leaders, I'm describing the pains that I'm having, and you're diagnosing me with a physical illness, but I just can't find the words for you to understand what I'm feeling beneath these physical barriers. Mental health topics can be difficult for anyone to put in words. It is especially difficult for those who may not speak the same language as a potential provider. While Spanish is the dominant language or some version of bilingual, there can be dialects for South Americans. It is helpful for providers to ask what the patient and family's preferred language is before starting an evaluation, and use interpreters when necessary, because the point has to be communicated clearly. Poverty and less health insurance coverage. 15.7% of Latin people in the US live in poverty compared to 7.3% of non-Hispanic whites. Individuals who live in poverty have a higher risk of mental illness. Conversely, individuals with mental health conditions have a higher risk of living in poverty. So that two-edged sword. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation in 2018, 19% of Hispanic people had no form of health insurance. In addition to facing an already limited proof of providers due to language barriers, people identifying as Hispanic or Latin have even fewer options when they are uninsured. So what else can we do? Our co-workers, our brothers and sisters in the field, in the community, we can encourage one another to take advantage of the services that are provided. Those of us who are already established in the mental health field and supporting one another, let's encourage our community to come forth so that you can serve as one that, if you're able to be an interpreter, so you can serve as one to get trained by NAMI to present family-to-family courses in your native tongue. So we have ways that we all can help and help this situation get better. We as individuals have a lack of cultural competence. Cultural differences may lead mental health providers to misunderstand and misdiagnose members of the Latin community based on how symptoms are described. So we talked about that in the African American community as well. The stigma that affects both of these groups of people is perceived as a weakness. It's perceived as you not being a strong person. And in our community, especially the males, you are the backbone, you are the strong man of the house in the Latin community. African American women, you are the strong one in the family. African American males that have their households running, they cannot show that weakness, when all in all, when you reach out for any help you need, is actually a sign of strength. Mm. Next slide, please. Oh, you have a comment?
Oh, no.
Okay. So NAMI, Greater Mississippi Valley, took advantage of an opportunity to work on some intercultural training. We were able to receive several grants that funded this training. So hint, hint, look for those grants out there. And 15 of our core education and support program leaders took 20 hours of training that included extensive personal coaching and collective discussion. And what I like to tell you about this experience is that we learned a lot about communicating with diverse communities by learning about ourselves first. So that's charity begins at home. We as a staff, we as a team, we have to grow and learn and help each other. And I encourage you and your staffs to do the same. Intercultural competency is more than acknowledging and sharing commonalities between individuals or cultures. If you stop there, you are minimizing the other person. What we learned is that a bridge between diverse communities, we needed as individuals to accept differences between us in order to make change and include others. This is required that we understand our own individual internal beliefs and biases and processes first. It was then that we were able to recognize differences and adopt appropriate communication styles that